We got you covered on the Week 18 slate here. If anyone is in a league that has a championship on the line, leave that league. But if you are not able to leave the league, go ahead and get ready to tune into the station here because we got a lot of your waiver wire pickups covered and more. This is RotoWire Fantasy Sports. Welcome to the Tuesday, January 4th edition of the RotoWire NFL podcast brought to you by WynnBET. I'm Joe Bartel. You can follow me at JB Fantasy Sports. And alongside me is Alan Seslowsky. I'm saying your name correctly, right? I always feel like I stumble over your last name to begin with.
You say it better than any teacher in my school ever said it, man. Seslowsky, they say. Seslowsky, they don't know what's going on. You said it perfectly right. And my friends, Joe Bartel is my friend. My friends call me Says.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I'm a Bartel, Joe Bartel, right? That's always been called Bartel. So It's really important to me that we have the last names correct, if nothing else. But happy to have you fill in for Jake today as we go through the Week 18 podcast. Don't worry, listeners out there. Jake will be back next week as we go through our award show rundown. We have one more podcast, a part of the RotoWire Weekly Podcast Network for next week. Looking forward to that, and I'll be teasing Jake because right now I am tied with him in the over-under win columns for NFL teams, and we have, I think, 9 teams that have to really decide things yet. So it's possible that I will have the advantage over him, and I will definitely brag about it if that does occur. But we have Week 18 to go, right? And championship week for most people out there. Hopefully not most, I should say, because again, if you are in a league that a championship happens on Week 18, you do not need to be in that league anymore. And I think this year especially is a certain time where with all the COVID things and different teams now likely getting finalized. And I was hoping with the Week 18 schedule that wouldn't be the case, but we had the Packers already clinched, the Bengals discussing Joe Burrow and Joe Mixon possibly not playing. I mean, there's a lot of teams that have lost incentive to have this last game. And if that's the case, hurts your playoff teams. We actually covered the waiver wire stuff before we really get into that and also break down the Monday night game between the Browns and Steelers. Not that really needs to have much discussion for that. Let's get a word from our sponsors, WynnBET. If there's one thing we appreciate here at RotoWire, it's making good decisions, and even more so making the right decision. Listen up, folks. I have an incredible offer for you with RotoWire's newest partner, WynnBET, the premier digital casino and sportsbook app. WynnBET is now the exclusive sponsor for RotoWire's Fantasy Podcast. WynnBET brings you all the latest action with a user-friendly interface, moneyline bets, boosted parlays, over-unders, round robins, live betting, and so much more right at your fingertips. If you want to break from sports betting, head to WynnBET's digital casino, take a spin on roulette, double down blackjack, slam with slots, or try your hand at baccarat. WynnBET is currently available in 7 states: Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Tennessee, and Virginia. While rapidly expanding at WynnBET, the possibilities are limitless. WynnBET is currently offering all RotoWire listeners a risk-free bet up to $500 on your first wager. Download WynnBET now. That's WYNNBET. WynnBET, the exclusive partner for RotoWire's Fantasy Podcast. Alan, like I said, we had a Monday Night Football game. I'm thankful that we can now stop this parading of the Cleveland Browns on Monday Night Television or primetime television. Thankfully, Baker Mayfield's done. Thankfully, our eyes can stop having to deal with watching another bad primetime performance as was last night.
Yeah, first and foremost, I want to say that was the sickest, best read of a spot I've ever saw. You know, like when I listen to podcasts, my sweet spot is listening on 1.25.
Yeah, I'm reading it at that speed.
No, that was 1.35, but it was clear and concise. That is a skill, Joe Bartel. I listen to you on when you sub in on XM Radio when you do your spots, and I am amazed at the polish that you have. So I am in envy right here. The reason I can't listen is because then I start feeling that I don't have that polish. But you know what? It's a skill you got to put in your 10,000 hours. Just like Baker Mayfield needs to put in his 10,000 hours. I think really
in the rehab facility, right?
Yes. The real takeaway is one of the biggest storylines of 2022 offseason is going to be, this is the year. Are they going to pay full freight to keep Baker Mayfield, or are they going to pass, or are they going to franchise tag him? Because if he does go, let's just say, like, no one can even think that that's going to happen, but that's when the QB dominoes are going to start to fall, because that would be an appealing place for a veteran quarterback. So I'm curious, what's your take? I mean, there's 3 options, right? There's franchise tag, long-term full price contract, $35 million a year, or let him go.
Yeah, I mean, this is the fun part of it. And especially when we do our jobs, I think the fantasy community is stuck in a week-to-week basis, and rightfully so. I mean, you have to analyze the matchup this week, but projecting down the line, I think that's the fun part for me, and it's why you and I like doing the Dynasty League stuff as much as we do. And kudos to you, Alan. We're gonna have we'll talk about it in a little bit, but the Dynasty podcast starting up here in the RotoWire NFL Football Network is gonna be a lot of fun, and I think that'll be a big talking point. What's gonna happen in these certain situations, whether it's Russell Wilson or Baker Mayfield, and I think that kind of, you mentioned the domino with Baker Mayfield. I actually think Russell Wilson is the first domino, and maybe to some extent Aaron Rodgers too, although I'm not sure he considers the Browns. If he's going to go anywhere, I really believe it'd be the Broncos or Steelers, and that would kind of be a separate story in its part. But if you're the Browns, you understand Baker Mayfield was injured for most of this season. He was a upper echelon quarterback last year in a scheme that was effective towards him when he was healthy. Should a quarterback have to have everything work in his favor to be effective? That's the question that the Browns have to have answered. And to me, if I'm building my team, I'd say no. Justin Herbert has had a lot of things go wrong, and yet is still clearly one of the best quarterbacks in the league. You're not drafting a Justin Herbert this year. Doesn't seem like one of those quarterbacks will be available. But when I'm thinking of quarterbacks that could succeed despite limitations in their scheme or offense or somebody hurt, it's not Baker Mayfield. And I don't know if that's because he was injured this year or if he just doesn't have the talent. I think clearly he is a leader. The team respects him. And those are qualities that you can't really quantify and don't necessarily show up on the box score when you're determining a quarterback's value. But at the same time, I mean, we've had 2 or 3 years now, Baker Mayfield being less than productive at a position that's most important. I think the Browns need to franchise tag him. And if there is a situation next year where he ends up getting injured, or we have Kareem Hunt out for a couple of games, or the offensive line is banged up again, you have to cut your losses and hope that maybe you'll be in a better spot to get a quarterback that could be more impactful than this class is.
Do you think franchise tagging him, though, undermines his credibility in the locker room? That's a concern, because you have to talk about real locker room dynamics. By franchise tagging him, what are they really saying? We're not so sure about you. And if the GMs and the coaches and everyone else is not so sure about him, that starts to trickle into the players. Is the rest? This guy, is he here? Is he not here? I think that just for credibility and locker room dynamics, you got to make a decision. He's our guy. We're going to go 3 years, 90. You can maybe go for 3 years instead of a 4-year deal. 3 for 90 guaranteed, or you just say, let's start all over. But it's easy to say, let's all start all over, because then who's going to be your quarterback? Case Keenum. This team is ready to compete for a championship or a championship run. They have the defense. They have the running game. They theoretically have the offensive line. Can Baker Mayfield do no harm? What do they say in medical school when you went there, Joe? They said, do no harm, right? That's right, the first rule of medical school. Is Baker Mayfield even on the caretaker level at this point, or is he just... I mean, when Baker Mayfield has a 3 or 4 interception game, you're not surprised.
Yeah, you're filling in for Jake right now, and his favorite phrase is he's a couple short of his MD, right? And I think that's the same thing for me. By no means am I able to go ahead and quantify the injury status of Baker Mayfield and what he's able to do. I feel the same way with Jake, but you're right. And maybe the workaround instead of a franchise tag is to do what the Titans did with Ryan Tannehill, or what we've seen with other quarterbacks too. I think Brock Osweiler had the same type of deal where, all right, it's a 5-year, $250 million deal, but you can opt out after 2 years, or the team cannot, like there's not guaranteed money after the first 2 years. So people look at that and on the outside, oh, you got your franchise quarterback locked up. Great deal by the Browns. But in reality, they're giving themselves some leverage to be able to get out of a deal if Baker Mayfield stumbles. And I think that might be the better route than a franchise tag if you are concerned about losing the locker room part. Again, I think Baker Mayfield is a really good leader. If there's one really positive that you can have for Baker Mayfield in his career right now, is I think he does have control of the locker room and he is a good leader. But if you are concerned about that happening, that might be the workaround for it. I don't know. I think, again, if a quarterback has to have everything working for him to be successful, then he's not really going to be that good of a quarterback. And I'm not committing $30 million a year for a quarterback that is at that level. That's just me building out a team. I can't make everything work to have my quarterback be effective. And I know that's hard to find quarterbacks that can do the reverse. There just aren't many Justin Herberts or Aaron Rodgerses out there. But there's no way I want to go ahead and commit that type of money and really more or less set your franchise tied to this guy for 2 or 3 years when that happens. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the Browns do. This was also Big Ben's send-off, right? We got the great deal for Roethlisberger. And I put down in the rundown, this is about, like, I think everybody outside of Pittsburgh cared absolutely zero about Big Ben.
Zero. I love that you said that.
Who? I don't care. Stop it, ESPN. Stop it, Monday Night Football. I don't care about Big Ben.
Oh, that's great.
And it's like, I know his legal issues factor in a little bit for me mentally too.
A little bit. No, it does. The nature of his legal issues were kind of like icky, right?
Yeah, icky. The last 4 or 5 years, Roethlisberger hasn't been Big Ben. Like, he really hasn't been that effective a quarterback. I saw a tweet, I think it was from ESPN Stats, that the combination of Baker Mayfield and Roethlisberger totaled, I think, or averaged 3.8 yards per completion. That's the lowest in since the merger, so that's 1970. That's exactly this type of game. Like, Roethlisberger's not Roethlisberger. Baker Mayfield certainly isn't whatever Baker Mayfield was last year, and I don't care about Ben Roethlisberger's sign-off. So the real deal for me was Najee Harris actually looked good, and for people who were drafting Najee Harris in the first round, especially in PPR leagues, you weren't upset, but I kept telling everyone, hey, I think he got kind of lucky because he's gotten more touches, more catches than he could have really ever imagined. Most people, aside from Mario, were not projecting him to get as many catches as he was. Mario's just brilliant, so he was already on top of that like he is with everything, it feels like. But you got bailed out for the most part. This was the prime Najee Harris game. If you are a Steelers fan, you're happy to see that happen. But if you're fantasy managers next year redrafting, it shouldn't take to week 17 for Najee Harris having a breakout game against a depleted Browns team that really had nothing to play for.
If you look at when we talk about the first round of 2022, and there's nothing that you like outside of Jonathan Taylor, right? Especially in one QB leagues. You're just like, you feel safe with anybody, even Christian McCaffrey. You're like, I guess, So right. When you talk about Najee Harris, who's going to be a first round fantasy pick in every league, he's not going to break your team. And you know this from being an experienced fantasy player. You can't win your fantasy football league in the first round, but you certainly can lose it. And Najee Harris is a great way. And there was no secret about it. No one thought Najee Harris was this dynamic player. When you draft Najee Harris in fantasy football, you're like, all right, this is a guy that's going to be a volume play on a pretty good team. Now, Ben Roethlisberger, we know he's not going to be there. That was, by the way, Sam, it was like, get him off the field already. He didn't want to leave. It was like the person who stays too long at your house after a Christmas party. Get the heck out of here already. I want to go to sleep, But next year, this is, Aaron Rodgers to the Steelers. Yes, we would love that. That boost up your Steelers. Deontay Johnson could be a first-round pick if that happens, right? But let's talk sense for a minute here. Let's say that doesn't happen. Be on the lookout. There is talk in some NFL circles that there is, and I don't know if the Steelers are one of them, but that Mitch Trubisky is garnering a lot of interest, and that is good for fantasy. Mitch Trubisky could be the next Ryan Tannehill, right? We all thought Ryan Tannehill sucked. We thought he was horrible, and now we think of him as like, okay, he's QB 15, right? Like he's going to have some QB 8, QB 7 days. Can Mitch Trubisky be that guy? The flamed out career as a top 10 pick, he was 2. And now he goes to a team that's already built to win with a running back like Najee Harris, kind of like Derrick Henry, has wide receivers, kind of like
AJ Brown, Julio Jones. Yep. So Mitch Trubisky, pick him up in Dynasty if he's out there, could be that at least make the offense functional. That's an interesting one. And you don't know this, but you're again filling in for Jake because last year, Mitchell Trubisky was one of his guys that, hey, quarterback 16, I'm a Packers fan, but I'll say it, I think Mitchell Trubisky can be a decent guy past quarterback 16. And obviously he was awful, terrible. I actually think Ryan Tannehill is not a very good quarterback, and quarterback 15 is what Ryan Tannehill is for the most part. That's not good. Like I'm not happy to have Ryan Tannehill or Baker Mayfield. I'm not happy to have Mitchell Trubisky, but when you are kind of doing a stopgap stuff, I get it. The Browns and Steelers situation is really interesting because the Browns, you mentioned, and I completely agree, are built to win now. I thought their defense was one of the best in the league this year. Entering it, they made a lot of great offseason additions, and I thought relatively did things well in the cap room perspective to be efficient for years to come. The Steelers have been the reverse. Losing Big Ben's contract will be great. They'll actually have a little bit of money to play with. But if you are signing Mitchell Trubisky off of free agency, that's about half, maybe 35% of that cap that Roethlisberger leaves completely down the drain. And you still have noticeable things, I think, in the defensive secondary to fix too. So I actually think it's more like the Steelers, other than TJ Watt and Fitzpatrick, are more in a rebuilding phase. But the ironic part is those guys are so good. I mean, TJ Watt might set the record he might set the sack record next week. They're so good that they might carry you past rebuilding phase, so you can never really truly be there. And that would hurt your quest to actually get a quarterback too. The Trubisky thing is interesting, and I think from a dynasty perspective, definitely a name to consider as well too. Let's move over to the quarterbacks for this week. Again, week 18. If you are in a league where week 18 matters, leave it. But we're at a point right now where you can't. So let's go ahead and through the podcast and kind of go through a few of these names. There's not a lot. And I went through a few of the teams I thought might be benching players. Again, I mentioned the Packers. Rodgers and Davante Adams said they want to play this week. What does that mean? Like, how often they're going to play? I don't know. As a Packers fan, I've been through this plenty, and I know you as a Cowboys fan, or well, I guess, yeah, right. Cowboys?
I'm a Jets fan, unfortunately.
Jets fan. So I'm thinking of Joe Daly, who's a Cowboys fan and sees Argos. That's fine. But you as a Jets fan have not had this experience where as number one seed, you have to figure out, we're going to bench our guys and have the bye week. We've dealt with this plenty here in Wisconsin, and I can tell you for certain I am queasy as all get up that they're going to be possibly 2 weeks the Packers starters aren't out there. So I'm hoping that LaFleur listens to his leadership, which has been kind of the theme of the past 2 months or so with the Packers, and does play Rodgers and Davante Adams to some extent. But how long will that be? I mean, as a fantasy manager, are you really going to be hoping that a half of Rodgers and Adams gets you enough to play? I don't think you want to go that direction. So it might be interesting to consider a few of these names out there. And I think the Bengals too, especially with Joe Burrow banged up and having to have Brandon Allen kneel at the game against the Chiefs last week. They're considering benching their guys too, as they can only fall to number 4 seed as an AFC North winner. So I think the first quarterback that comes to mind is Taysom Hill. And that's the top option for most people overall, but certainly a quarterback going against the Falcons this week. I think Taysom Hill has impressed me enough where if the Saints were to move on from Sean Payton's favorite toy, he could be an interesting name in the offseason where the lesser quarterback roulettes, the Trubisky's the world. Taysom Hill factors into the equation a little bit for me, but where do you stand on him? What do you think with his matchup this week against the Falcons?
Yeah, if Taysom Hill is out there, he's always good for fantasy because he is one of the rare, he's the running QBs always have that high floor, high upside. And, they proactively design plays for Taysom Hill. And we don't love the weaponry. I mean, we always like Alvin Kamara. And I think he's a nice, safe play. I mean, at this point, if you're in a Week 18 championship, hopefully you have a better quarterback. But if you just, if you're in if you have Aaron Rodgers and you need to hit the waiver wire, Taysom Hill lines up is a guy who's actually going to be playing because, of course, we like Trey Lance maybe a little bit better for his upside or Tyler Huntley, but those guys may not play. So you need to make a decision on when waivers run, who's it going to be? You need to roster Taysom Hill. I like him for fantasy. I can't see Sean Payton ever letting him go. That's like the girlfriend that's not good for you, but that you just can't dump. You just have to keep her there. So look for him to be on there. They could probably do another situation where they bring in another quarterback or maybe draft one. The Saints will have a mid-round pick. By most of the mock drafts I saw, the best quarterbacks are getting taken no earlier than pick 10 this year. I've always liked Taysom Hill because he always has a late ADP or he's waiver wire fodder, but he always has that dynamic, explosive league winning. I know that's a term that we all love. League winning week upside. And by the way, I think I've seen more Week 18 championships now. People were a little confused on how to handle there's an extra week. Do we week 14? Do we do a 2-week championship? So I think that's why we've seen a lot of viewership, a lot of interest in waiver wire this week. So I like the Taysom Hill call, especially against the Falcons. He's playing for a contract next year.
Yeah, and theoretically, when the Week 18 schedule was announced, I think most people in the fantasy industry said, this is dumb. I hate this. Change is bad. And I agreed. I'm right there with it. But this was the one benefit that theoretically with the Week 18 schedule, especially with the divisional games happening, there wouldn't be teams having to bench players. But again, we see the Packers, we could see the Bengals. I think there might be more. I mean, when we have 2 teams already at the beginning of the week when we're doing this podcast, with how the season has went, especially the last month, anything can happen. I think just 2 teams choosing to bench their guys feels unrealistic to me, with most of the playoff seeding already locked up, especially in the NFC too. So Taysom Hill is one name. You mentioned the other name as well too, Trey Lance. And I guess I'm of the opinion Jimmy Garoppolo will not play. Like if I'm putting money on a player being active or not active, torn thumb muscles everywhere, that doesn't sound very productive. We saw Mr. Mallet finger himself, Russell Wilson, struggle for many years, or many weeks, I should say, with that injury. Why would the Niners put Garoppolo out there? Except they need to win to be able to get into the playoffs, and I think that's the bigger part. I think it's an indictment on Kyle Shanahan that you trade up trade as many picks as you do to move up to draft Trey Lance and not have him prepared for this moment, the last week of the regular season, to be at least an effective starter. Like if you are really debating between four-finger Jimmy Garoppolo and Trey Lance, I think you have some reservations as a coach. Like you have failed in Trey Lance's development because this is not week one. This is not August or September 1st where we're having, oh, hey, should Trey Lance play? This is now January. We are into the new year. Trey Lance should have been able to be developed a little bit more because the upside is certainly more present for Trey Lance than I think Jimmy Garoppolo, who's another one of those Ryan Tannehill, Baker Mayfield candidates where it's like, great, your upside is maybe top 10 in the given week, but we know the downside is way worse, like missing Emmanuel Sanders for that touchdown to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think that was the spark that started this all, right? If let's, in another universe where Jimmy Garoppolo completes that pass to Emmanuel Sanders, the 49ers don't even trade up to get this pick, right?
Oh, sure.
They don't, right. Mm-hmm. So obviously we know now they should have stayed, but knowing what we know now, let's say that they moved up, right? They probably would have taken Micah Parsons, right? I mean, he would be the number 2 pick.
Or Chase, right? I mean,
sure,
Chase has been insane too.
But they just are pretty loaded with the weaponry. Going into the season, everyone liked Brandon Ayuk. We still do.
Except Kyle Shanahan.
Right. Exactly. Because that's true. The first 5 weeks, George Kittle, we know, is leading the league in your points per blocking league, because they always keep him in the block. And then Deebo Samuel is a top 5 wide receiver heading into next year, top 8 at the worst. So maybe Chase would have been the first wide receiver, like maybe another pick or two, because he was the first wide receiver off the board. But I think that, think about it. So the Jaguars, if we go back to that draft, and I don't mean to tangent off here, they probably would still take Trevor Lawrence, right? Even though it's been terrible. But pick 2, the Jets, do you think that they would have taken knowing everything you know now, Micah Parsons is pick 2? They would have added, he's the second best player in the draft?
I think they would have won quarterback for sure. And so here's the issues. I'm biased, and I thought Zach Wilson was at minimum the 4th best. Like you could have debated with me with Mac Jones as well, which one of those guys is the worst of the first round quarterbacks. I really did not think Zach Wilson was that good. And it's like, oh, hey, the Patrick Mahomes comparisons, but wait, he's like 30 pounds less than Patrick Mahomes.
He threw one pass sideways in college and they called him Patrick Mahomes.
Stop with that stuff. We can't just compare every new quarterback to Patrick Mahomes. It doesn't work that way. There's only one Patrick Mahomes. That's why the Chiefs are probably the prohibitive favorite for the 3rd straight year to go to the Super Bowl from the AFC. I just think it's ridiculous to have that stuff. So I don't think Zach Wilson should have been number 2, but I would have went Trey Lance or Justin Fields. And I think what you've seen from Fields so far, you have to be happy for the Bears, but certainly if you're the Jets too, you might want to have that as well. I don't know. I think Trey Lance has the potential to be the best quarterback of this class. I said that in August. I still feel that now today, even though Kyle Shanahan's kind of ruining that a little bit, or at least I'm disappointed again with the lack of build for him. I would not have went with Zach Wilson at number 2, but I think the Jets should have went quarterback. That was the right choice. It was the wrong guy.
Yeah, I like Justin. As a Jet fan, I like Justin Fields there too. I guess the jury's still out. The only reason that Trey Lance is probably the best, because he's the one that looked the best without doing anything, right? He was so you were talking originally about having him prepared. Did you see the statement that Mike Zimmer, when he was talking about Kellen Mond?
Oh,
Did you see that clip? Okay. For those of you who haven't seen that clip, it was a very viral clip. They asked Mike Zimmer, the coach of the Minnesota Vikings, how are we going to see Kellen Mond, their running quarterback they got in the 3rd round in week 18? And he basically looked like, somebody insulted his parents. It's like, he said, no, I see him enough in practice. That is, that talk about not developing a quarterback. They took him 1 pick. Was it before Davis Mills? Right? They could have had Davis Mills.
So. Yeah, it was, or vice versa, Mills. But either way, Kellen Mond was going to be a projection, like, hey, let's get the athletic guy, maybe see what we could do with him. This is the same franchise that looked at Justin Jefferson in the preseason of his rookie year and said, wait, I think Chad Beebe might be the better wide receiver to start. So I'm not trusting Mike Zimmer whatsoever on developments of rookies altogether. But that was one of the more savage comments ever. And I kind of like just I give 2 eeps about my job because I know I'm fired in a week. Mike Zimmer. This is like peak old man gives 0 beeps at all. And I like that Mike Zimmer that we're seeing right now. But I was having that discussion with a few of my Vikings friends, which I should never have as a Packer friend, but I do. And I was like, you're watching Sean Mannion right now, and the game was over 20-0. Why wouldn't you go ahead and put Mond in there? We had him for 1 series. He almost throws a pick 6, and Mike Zimmer's like, oh, God, man. We can't do this. We're going to get even more embarrassed. Get him out there. That was, that's like a Oh, man, that's the worst case scenario. Is you put Mond in there, he almost throws the pick six, then you take him out. If you're talking about losing confidence, that's the one scenario where I feel like Mond could have lost confidence. And then Zimmer doubled down, was like, no, actually, I've seen enough of practice on this sucks, and there's no reason. That's a good transition into like the two streamer quarterbacks that we can maybe discuss. Mond or Sean Mannion might be one of them, because again, we don't know if Kirk Cousins will be activated off the reserve COVID-19 list. They play the Bears this week in a nonsensical game that does not matter whatsoever. But we also have Case Keenum, who has a different situation too as well, with Baker Mayfield possibly considering surgery. Probably shouldn't be playing, shouldn't have been playing the past 2 months, but certainly shouldn't be playing right now. There's a few of these two streamer quarterback options. I also mentioned Tim Boyle on the rundown in a revenge game against the Packers, with all their guys all their starters probably benched other than Jair, who I hope plays at least a little bit this week. Is there any of those two streamer guys that you would maybe consider this week at all?
First of all, you mentioned Sean Mannion. There was nothing more sickening than listen to the NBC broadcast booth trying to sell Sean Mannion to the audience. Oh, this guy, he's really good. He's that big arm. It's like, dude, this guy sucks. Sean Mannion,
the big arm that he missed like 5 yards on like multiple throws.
Right.
You're like, okay, I understand you guys trying to talk him up, but let's do the insulting thing for quarterbacks. Oh, he's really intelligent. He sees the game really well. He moves in the pocket really well, right? Those are the ways to insult the quarterbacks without being actually mean.
Yeah, Mannion is no good. Tim Boyle is the interesting one, and he was an internet joke for a while because of his famous or infamous college stats at Connecticut, where he threw 1 touchdown and 13 picks. I mean, how does that guy even get into the NFL? But that's the guy you want to say, even though despite this terrible track record, this unbelievable track record, he made it to the NFL. I like Tim Boyle because I like the culture around the Lions. I mean, they were down 3 touchdowns, still kicking onside kicks, throwing to Amon-Ra St. Brown, and we're going to have to talk about him when we talk Dynasty, of course. He's going to be a polarizing rank. But I like Tim Boyle because it's fight till the end. It doesn't matter if they're down 50-0. They're going to be playing because all of those guys know that their job is on the line for week 1 next year. And they're definitely going to be playing against, the JV team in the second half. So Boyle is the guy that hold your nose, and it's going to be a fun watch. It's not one of those just put him in your lineup. And then if you need a quarterback, you're in a super flex league. Hopefully there's better options out there, but Tim Boyle might end up being a top 12 quarterback. He certainly will be inside my top 15 rankings for this week.
Yeah, see, and I thought I was being aggressive saying he was going to be a top 20 quarterback, because I really do think Tim Boyle will be fine. And if you are in a super flex league, you're saying, well, maybe you have better options. I don't know. I mean, you don't have better options. You don't. Like, I think Tim Boyle actually would be a relevant super flex option. I would take him over Case Keenum, over Sean Mannion, over any of the Giants guys that might start. And I know like most of those are obvious names because like the Giants, for example, have just been garbaged here. But I think Boyle will be fine enough. And I think, again, against the Packers, this will be a pretty good matchup. We've had Matt Flynn do well against the Lions. I'm hoping Jordan Love also does well against the Lions, but I do think this could be a good Tim Boyle game. And if you had to play him in Superflex, I would not be too worried about it too. Let's move over. Well, go ahead.
Can I ask you one more thing? Because you mentioned Matt Flynn, and he had a legendary snapback this week on social media. Did you catch his snapback?
Man, I might have missed it. I thought I saw him last week, but I'm not sure.
That was the last week one when someone said, "Oh, you remember when the Seattle paid you $10 million?" That thing. You know?
Yeah, he was like, "I got to sit on the bench and just chill," right?
Basically, he was goofing on him. They were trying to insinuate you weren't good and you got overpaid as a contract, and he just said, "Yeah, that was awesome, man."
Which is great. And then he came back to Green Bay and had to actually sub in for Aaron Rodgers for a little bit. I love Matt Flynn. That was one of my wife's first games that we went to, was that Matt Flynn record-breaking game. So she has probably an infatuation with Matt Flynn more than anyone should, even like Matt Flynn's mother. But yeah, that's a fun game in my mind, and I think as a Packers fan, it's a great memory to go back and think on as well too. So, like I said, let's get to those running backs, because there actually is a decent amount of guys that you could consider for this week if you are in a championship scenario. But first, before we do, let's get a word from our sponsors here. I guess I should say from Daily Fantasy Sports Redefined. This episode of RotoWire Fantasy Sports Podcast is brought to you by HOFR, Daily Fantasy Sports Redefined. No confusing salary caps, no annoying player drafts, just simple multiple choice questions on the stats you know and the players you love. That's right. The majority of HOFR contests focus on single sporting events and only feature questions about popular players and recognizable stats, allowing users to make their picks confidently and quickly. Plus, you never play against the house or versus those fancy sharks. The playing field is level for even the most amateur user to find him or herself landing in the money. Unlike those other apps where an incorrect answer can end your night, on HOFR, incorrect answers never eliminate you from competition. I played the other night, and the questions were as simple as how many touchdowns will Tom Brady throw, or which player will have the most rushing yards. So make your NFL Sunday picks with confidence and ease on HOFR. So do not wait another second. Download HOFR from the Apple App Store or Google Play Store right now. HOFR, it's everything the fantasy sports world has been waiting for. Okay, so I talked about the running backs, and I think we had a lot kind of pop up over the last 2 or 3 weeks, and for most people, that's now made so they are not rosterable in our threshold. Again, we try to target players under 50% roster on Yahoo, so Deonta Foreman, probably like a 60% rostered, no-go, and even like the Justin Jackson of the world who emerged after Austin Eckler was out. Again, trying to avoid those players. I think Jarrett Patterson's a really interesting name with Antonio Gibson. I don't know. If you're watching, Gibson didn't play last week because he was on the COVID-19 list and was placed there, I think, on Saturday or Friday. But given all the injuries he has and Washington season officially being done, I don't really think there's any reason to risk Gibson. And you should be throwing out players like Kellen Mond, but in this case, Jarrett Patterson, to see what you have from a depth perspective in a game that might matter, at least from hey, this is not the preseason. We're going to have actual starters out there on an NFL team. I think Jarrett Patterson's interesting to consider if you need to play a running back.
Yeah, and I like Patterson. He went to a small school. He went to Buffalo, and he's one of these guys that everyone thinks is like really small, really tiny, but he's not as tiny as you think. He's about 190.
Yeah, I saw your tweet about that.
The zero.
He's posing with trophies, right?
That's right. Well, the joke was that Sleeper accidentally had him as 0'5", and I made the joke that he's the guy who poses for trophies. I mean, on top of those little league trophies you get. But Patterson is he's a good player. He's going to be like an NFL journeyman. He's volume, right? He's a volume play. He had 12 carries last week, about 5 targets, and he got in the end zone. So if he's out there, he's a very good he's one of these guys that's going to be playing for a roster spot next week. And it might be a meaningless game to them, but it's not a meaningless game to him. He's going to be out there trying hard. I think you correctly identified him as the best of the best fantasy pickups for running back next week. But you also mentioned, Rex Burkhead was the guy that I had earmarked. So I don't know if you were going to get into him a little bit, but you're working on.
It was like, You're in week 18. Do you really want to rely on a Texans player? That was kind of there was a few players I'm like, they're getting a decent amount of work. And in the case of Rex Burkhead, David Johnson may or may not play again. But it's the Texans. And against a Colts team, I believe, against the Titans, who still have something to play for when it comes to seeding perspective. And theoretically, that defense has really been good. Like if you were to say which one AFC team that is in the playoffs is a pretender in your mind, I think the Titans would first come to mind, and that's depending on the stats of Derrick Henry. But I do get a little bit concerned about Rex Burkhead's workload. And if you are trying to beat the Titans, I think it's more of the passing game that can do so. So Brandon Cooks or Nico Collins, who again, we'll do the dynasty conversation later. Love Nico Collins. I think he is a guy that I'll be buying every bit of share if I possibly can. I think that's the scenario as opposed to Rex Burkhead, who admittedly did get a season high in receptions last week. So maybe they're actually factoring more in the passing game, which would be great. But that's where I get a little bit concerned. I'd rather have Patterson. You could tell I have not done the home podcast before because I stupidly forgot to bring my charger over. That's what I was doing now. You had discussed Patterson. Was there anybody else you had mentioned besides him?
Yeah. We're talking about Burkhead, right?
Right. Yep.
And Burkhead, I like because you're not looking to win. Like he basically won you the week in week 16.
Yeah.
If you can bank 15 touches, right? If you know that you have 15 touches, that's a playable running back. And Burkhead still might be available on the waiver wire because the teams that were available to pick him up, there was 4 teams left last week, and everyone might have been set at running back. So if you just are desperate and need someone that you know is going to get 15 touches, that is a currency right there. So if you need 12 to 14 points, I think that's what's good there. Both of the Jets running backs, Joe, Walter and Ty Johnson. Walter got the carries. He had 14 carries last week. Ty Johnson got the touchdown. With Michael Carter presumably not playing, he took a nasty hit.
Concussion,
yep. Yeah. Coleman is out. Are you comfortable playing any of these guys against Buffalo?
So that's the part. Is Coleman out? Like that was I don't know if Coleman will actually be active or not for this game. And again, it's the same issue with the Texans as we have the Jets. Do you really want to be playing a guy that's not talented in a backfield that's not very good? And that's where I kind of lean towards like Austin Walter is not very talented. I think Ty Johnson actually might be okay. And certainly from a depth perspective with the Jets, for whatever reason, can't really use his speed effectively. I think Michael Carter is really good. And I think we've seen certainly flashes this year despite a dysfunctional offense. Tevin Coleman's not it. Austin Walter's not it. So I guess Ty Johnson by default. But we're mentioning a few other names. And I've like at running back, I feel like we have to maybe mention a former Jet and Le'Veon Bell, who now kind of rises to the occasion with Ronald Jones out with the ankle injury, presumably not playing this week as well, too. We know Leonard Fournette won't also be back. And there's the Keyshawn Vaughn factor. I mean, the third-round pick from a couple of years ago, who has been a disappointment in every shape of the word so far. Le'Veon Bell actually might be more intriguing than Rex Burkhead or Ty Johnson, in my opinion.
Can you imagine a Week 18 championship won by Le'Veon Bell? That would be perfect.
That's why you don't play Week 18 championships. No,
exactly.
No way Le'Veon Bell should be a person we care about in any point of the season. Yet here we are in Week 18. We're like, hey, maybe he could be an RB2 this week. God, don't play any of these leagues.
Yeah, no, I really like that. But I want to rewind on something you said before. You were talking about Michael Carter, and you correctly identified him as being an interesting player. Where do you think that he gets drafted in redraft leagues next year? Let's just say the offensive line, the injuries are good to go. The Jets have incredible pass catchers, whoever they sign, and, it's year 2 of Zach Wilson. So the offense is looking, it's not doormat, but it's, somewhere in the middle to low middle. Where are you comfortable taking in a PPR league Michael Carter for next season?
Yeah, you mentioned the credible pass catchers, and we'll get to Braxton in a little bit too. And I actually think the Jets do have a credible group of pass catchers. And for my reservation with Zach Wilson too, there are going to be upside games for him in his career. Like he will probably be a top 20, top 15 guy, much like Ryan Tannehill and Baker Mayfield, where there are weeks where you could probably start him. And by default, there's going to be pass catchers that kind of fit into the equation. I would like to see the offensive philosophy use Michael Carter more as a pass catcher, and that's where I get a little bit concerned. And maybe it's Zach Wilson not making the correct reads, or maybe it's the offensive line kind of falling apart. But I think he, at the moment, or at least this season, for most of the season, has been one of the best weapons for the Jets, and they haven't utilized him the way you would think you would utilize Carter coming out of North Carolina. So I think I would draft him. So like David Montgomery was a 3rd or 4th round pick in leagues this year and was the clear number 1 option for the Bears. Bears offense wasn't going to be very good, but like, okay, he's going to be pretty good. And then I flipped to like David Johnson, who was being drafted in the 7th or 8th round, or AJ Dillon in the 7th or 8th round. And you're hoping the right scenarios would occur for that value to kind of rise. He's somewhere in between that spot. He's certainly not a 3rd round guy like David Montgomery or Darrell Henderson or, Sony Michel, if that works out for the Rams, like those type of players. But I don't think he's as low as the David Johnsons of the world or whatever that caliber of player will be next year. So maybe 6th or 7th round, which ironically was where Carter was being drafted this year, right? I mean, that's by the end of August drafts, Carter was more or less in that same spot. As a Jets fan, where do you see Carter being drafted?
I think I'm not going to have Michael Carter on my team because of what you just said. You said that he should be going in the 6th or 7th round, and I agree with you, but I think he's going to be one of these running backs that gets pushed up in what I believe is going to be a shift back to wide receiver heavy 1st round. So in the past, we've seen 10 or 11 running backs. We're going to see 4 or 5 receivers go in the 1st round.
Tyreek, Cooper. That's the
Cooper. You're talking about Cooper Kupp, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And the 2, and Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. I think all those guys go in.
Chase is a 1st round pick next year?
I think he goes 11, 12, 13, 14, something like that.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, you're right. That's fair. Okay.
So, if you're going to take him at 11, if you're going to take him at 14, you just take him at 11 because the guy on the hook is going to take him if you don't.
Yeah, and I think that's more of an indictment on the running backs that were so high at the top are now not at all. I mean, like Derrick Henry, you probably feel safest about Derrick Henry. He hasn't played half the season. Certainly Chris McCaffrey, GQ model himself, I don't know. There are so many people that are burned by him that if he ends up being a 1st round pick, I think the value is certainly there. But I don't know if people are taking him at that point anymore. Alvin Kamara, probably still a 1st round pick. Saquon Barkley gone. Aaron Jones, I think depending on his situation. You don't think he's a first-round pick?
I think that somebody might do it, but if it's him and A.J. Dillon with this current split, with or without Rodgers.
Okay. And then
Joe Mixon.
Antonio Gibson was a late first rounder this year. He's not there anymore. Joe Mixon guaranteed first round. Yeah.
First round.
I think if Melvin Gordon is gone for the Broncos, and he very well is, Javonte Williams is a first round pick too. So there's still 6 names, and then you throw Travis Kelce in there, or if you're in a dumb league,
I mean,
Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson.
Right.
People are stupid like that. So I think it would be hard for me to say that Jamar is a guaranteed first round pick, but as in that 11 to 14 range, yeah, I kind of wonder what the Bengals, like if they have a flame out this postseason and they just lose in the first round and get, dunked on by 30 and Jamar Chase suddenly forgets to catch the ball like in the preseason, how that would affect people. Like if we have this, the recency bias that affects things too much, or if there is people like us in the industry pushing this narrative that, hey, Jamar Chase super good. Look how great he was over the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season and broke rookie records. And Justin Jefferson's been great. And now all LSU wide receivers have been great all time. Terrace Marshall, can't wait for him to finally emerge. Jake and I were pushing him early in the year, so I'm bitter. But
that was a reasonable. I liked your take. I was listening to your take and Jake's take on Terrace Marshall. I thought that was sound, and just given everything we had at the time, he really hasn't gotten the opportunity. So I wouldn't write yourself off or call that an L. It just you didn't get the opportunity.
I get hard on I'm harder on myself than most people. I think you tune into this podcast for a reason. You're hoping to get insight, and great. We could talk fantastically. Jake's beard is great. You're envious of that when you see it in the video. But we want to be able to get people right and have some victories in that. Yeah. I think that's where Marshall gets me upset. And I was really in on him. So that's right. It's a little bit hard with Jamar Chase as the late first round candidate.
Go back to what your original question for me was, and that is that Michael Carter will get pushed up by those taking wide receivers early. So let's just say you take Justin Jefferson in the first round, and then it loops around and you take another receiver. Let's say, I'm trying to think of A.J. Brown or DK Metcalf. So you started with 2 receivers. Okay, so when it comes back in the third round, and you don't love anyone that's sitting there, you don't want to take a quarterback. So let's just say you either load up or on another receiver. Let's say, I don't know. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head but what I'm saying is in the fourth round, when you spin around the early part of the fourth round, that's where I think Michael Carter is going to end up getting pushed up to, because people are going to, what they called the running back dead zone this year, right? That was the popular name for it. So I think that you're going to see Carter be one of the guys that gets pushed up, and that's why I won't have him, because people are going to attack these wide receivers. Maybe that third round is like Terry McLaurin. His ADP will drop to the 3-4 turn. So that's why I think it's going to be interesting to see. I'm with you. I liked him a lot, Michael Carter. I had Cody Carpentier come on my podcast and say, take Michael Carter ahead of Trey Sermon. Obviously, that turned out to be a good take.
Oh, yeah.
But at the time, it was not what the consensus was there. So it's pretty interesting. And that led us back to what we were talking about with the Jets running backs. I think if you're desperate enough, those guys are guaranteed touches this week, and specifically Ty Johnson, like you said. So I would not be like, hey, pumped to start him against Buffalo. But if you need 12 touches guaranteed, I mean, that's a guy that you might have to play in this Week 18 championship.
Absolutely. There's a few other names, too, that I think we have to at least mention. The Eagles' backfield is going to be difficult, and I think it's not fair, Alan, to ask you, hey, who's going to start this week when you have 12 guys on the COVID-19 list as of Monday, and probably growing given what we've seen with other teams and how they've dealt with it. But right now, the lone man in the Eagles' backfield is Kenny Gamewell. I know you're a big dynasty guy. You like the rookies quite a bit. I was high on Kenny Gamewell entering the year. Ironically, it was like Michael Carter and Kenny Gamewell were 2 of my 3 or 4 favorite running backs. I was a little bit lower on Javonte Williams than most people, and by default, you had to find somebody. It was Gamewell and Carter that I like quite a bit. If it is Gainwell as the lone back for the Eagles, or like other practice squad guys too, like let's say Jordan Howard can't play and Boston Scott can't play. We know Miles Sanders is already out. I think Kenny Gainwell can actually be a really reasonable top 15 player at running back, so easily running back 2 or flex, and is probably widely available for people.
Yeah, I think the name of the game here that we keep coming back to is that who is going to get opportunity. I mean, it's a fantasy football like principle. The running back that gets touches is playable, not necessarily the wide receiver who gets targets, although we do chase targets. But if we knew Nick Aquino Westbrook was getting 9 targets, we're not like pumped to play him. But if we know Kenny Gainwell is set up to get 12 to 15 touches, we could play him. So that's the guy. He's in Dynasty. Dynasty players liked him a little bit more than I did. I think he comes from that Memphis backfield that's had Antonio Gibson, Tony Pollard. I mean, there's more that came out of there that have been fantasy viable. So yeah, you're correct that Kenny Gamewell, keep an eye on that, because as we know, we do a podcast on Tuesday, and everything that we said on Friday by Friday is completely wrong. So
right,
there's notes on your phone, alerts on your phone have never been more. It's the grinders that are winning this year. It's the Saturday pickups that have won weeks this year. So I like that pick. Kenny Gamewell wasn't even on my list. I'm putting him like to the top of my list right now.
I like that. I'll give you one other name, and we here at Madison call him like the drunk litmus test. If you can say Dare Ogunbowale's name, you are not drunk. That's your starting backfield for the Jacksonville Jaguars this week. Dare Ogunbowale got a junk time touchdown against the Colts, which kind of salvaged his fantasy value. Is a decent enough pass catcher, and I don't think people quite understand that. I say his name in jest, but I think he actually is a decent enough player in the NFL level. I mean, we've seen a lot of UW-Madison running backs be effective. I think Corey Clement is the perfect example where never was a pass catcher. The Eagles ended up making him work. He's gotten an extra 2-3 years out of his career in the same way. I think Dare Ogunbowale can be that same type of factor. And with James Robinson out for the year, that Trevor Lawrence offense just looking absolutely defunct, I think Ogunbowale can be another. He's not a running back too. Like of these names that we mentioned, he's probably on the lower end of my list. But you might have to start him again with everything that we're going on, and probably more COVID information popping up as the week progresses. Ogunbowale might be interesting to consider too.
Yeah, you were a little redundant with what you said. You said garbage time and Jacksonville Jaguars. Isn't every play garbage time with those guys?
You're right.
Yeah, I mean, you just say he's on Jacksonville, and we assume it's garbage time. So Dare Ogunbowale, he's almost like a poor man's Giovanni Bernard, right? I mean, Giovanni in his peak was really good, but I like Ogunbowale. He was always good when he got opportunity, and that it's been no different on this team when he was on Tampa Bay. So. He scored for you on that. That was a really nice run. I mean, even though he looks pretty shifty out there. Now, this is the definition of a journeyman running back that every snap matters to him. He knows that he could be on his couch next week, on a practice squad next week, or he could be the starting running back for a team so he's a professional running back. He's not as small again as you think he is. He's 5'10", 205, and he's fast. So last week we saw him get 9 carries. The week before, 17 carries. That's another one that I didn't have him on my list. I actually started him in a deep league. One league was like a third place game. And as I always tell everyone, no one cares about your third place game. No one cares about it. We don't care that you're getting your money back.
I was in far too many this year, and I can agree with you. I did not.
Yeah, I won 5 of those. And people could care less. So I like Ogunbowale too. And oh man, I only because I heard you say his name 3 times am I able to correctly pronounce it. Can you correctly pronounce the Denver tight end? Not Noah Fant.
Oh, Alberto. Yeah, no, I go Alberto for a reason because I cannot. But I'm very aware if we were discussing Alberto is going to be synonymous with I won't even try. And like I had a college background where we've done newspaper stuff and TV training, and I know as long as you say the name fast and confidently, it's fine. No one's going to ever really get upset with you. I will never bother with Alberto. Alberto is Alberto for a reason for me. If you're able to do that, that's fine. Let
me try it. Okawebunam.
Exactly. Yeah, and you said slow and it sounded confident. That's how you know you're professional, Al. That's
I don't even know if that's the right way. I don't even know if it's the right way. But like you said, yeah, just that. I think that's a good life lesson you just gave right there. Just say it with confidence, and people will believe you.
I'm providing all those life lessons, if nothing else. That's what this podcast is for. One other name. I know we spent a lot of time at running back, but I think it's worth mentioning for people who really hate themselves. Cam Akers is possibly back for the Rams this week. And I have a certain subsection of Twitter followers and friends that are Rams fans. And again, I don't know why I continue to do this to myself with both Vikings and Rams fans, but here I am, who are all ecstatic that Cam Akers might make his return. This is ridiculous. He should not be playing whatsoever. Mari and I talked about this on Friday on the SiriusXM show. This is the stupidest idea that's ever been done before. But if Cam Akers does play, I think you're the Rams. You want to give him at least 6 or 7 touches. If this is 100% healthy Cam Akers, 6 or 7 touches can go a long way. I'm not playing him, and I would not ever recommend anyone to play him, but I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, there's no upside in playing him for fantasy, and I think there's even less upside of playing him in reality. And what I mean by that is, let's say everything goes well. Everyone's like, he carries the ball, and each time he gains 2.5 to 4 yards. All right, great. What happens if he has an aggravation? The whole story of the week is going to be that that the coaching and the GMs were abusive to him. They forced him back in the game. They put him in too soon, and they ruined his career. There's literally no upside of playing him. And like you said, what's his max touch? 5, 6? I mean, if he gets 10, that would be insane. We're not looking at him in practice. I would definitely not play him for fantasy. And by the way, in our dynasty rankings, I am going to be way lower on him. He was kind of like a fake first-round pick in dynasty startup leagues this year because it was kind of dicey what his touch share was going to be. He had that strong finish to the previous season. I'm not looking to draft a guy with my first 3 picks who's coming off an Achilles tear. And I'm okay being wrong because someone who I pick instead of him, J.K. Dobbins, David Montgomery, is going to give me 80% of the production if I'm wrong about Cam Akers.
Yeah, the Dobbins one in particular, like I thought Akers was 4 or 5 among those rookie running backs last year, and that was by no means a knock on Akers. It was just that Jonathan Taylor was better, DeAndre Swift was better, J.K. Dobbins was better, and I still feel that way even coming off these injuries too. So this is more of just a reminder: don't play Cam Akers. The Rams shouldn't be doing it, and you certainly shouldn't be doing it for fantasy either. We've spent a lot of time talking running backs. We'll have to go through quickly a little bit on the wide receivers and tight ends. And, spoiler, there are no tight ends. I don't hate myself enough to recommend any tight ends to you guys this week. Tyler Conklin was like the only name I was seeing in other places. And if you're having to really debate between Tyler Conklin and other people, kudos to you for making it to this Week 18 championship. That's really hard. But before we get to the wide receivers, let's get a word from our sponsor, Skybox Sports Network. Skybox Sports Network is your hardcore source for odds and sports tickers. Skybox Sports has been creating an entertaining and relevant product for restaurants, sports, bars, casinos, race and sports books, arenas, and stadiums for years. Now you can bring a little Vegas into your fan cave. Skybox's low-cost and state-of-the-art Wi-Fi platform is a simple and affordable plug playing active format. Skybox sports tickers bringing live odds, propositions, fantasy sports, hires, fires, trades, breaking news, and recaps with in-depth coverage for the NFL, NBA, MLB, NASCAR, PGA, UFC, specialty events, and so much more. If it's sport, Skybox Sports Network probably has you covered in the news section. Visit skyboxsportsnetwork.com and use promo code RotoWire5 for a 5% discount off of your order. All right, wide receivers at least that I think could be pickup worthy this week. I'm just going to run through some of the names. And Alan, you could stop me if you think one really jumps out. KJ Osborne with Adam Thielen out again. Osborne of that junk time touchdown against the Packers last week. Marquez Callaway against the Falcons, maybe. Cedric Wilson with Michael Gallup done for the season. Cyril Grayson, Braxton Berrios. Is there any of these guys that really are immediately pickup and plays for you this week?
Yeah, I like the poor man's Danny Amendola, Braxton Berrios. They just proactively try to get him the ball. He does everything. If your league scores for return touchdowns, by the way, I won a 3rd place game on that. My opponent had Berrios and they didn't count the return touchdown. You know, like some leagues don't count return touchdowns.
Right,
yeah. So I won by 5, and that actually happened. I like all the guys you mentioned. We know if Tom Brady trusts you, he throws you the ball. And the 28-year-old, what's his name? Cyril Grayson, is that his name?
I was saying Cyril, but it could be Cyril.
I don't know. I have no idea what his name is because, again, is a dynasty player. I only study guys that are 23 and to 15 years old. I don't study these 28-year-olds, you know. And the one other guy I want to add to that, he's had 2 good weeks in a row. If you're in a deep league, starts 3 receivers in a flex. I was unaware of him, and I'm ashamed of myself. Is Antoine Wesley on the Cardinals?
Oh yes, Cardinals. Yeah,
he's had 3 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks, so they look for him. He's a big guy, 6'4", 206. And if they're gonna manage some of the snaps of some of the other guys, this is a player that they're gonna force feed 9 targets over the last 2 weeks. I like him, even though it's an ugly play.
Yeah, so I thought about adding Wesley to the docket, and the only reason I didn't, because I didn't know what Rondale Moore's status would be. And I think if Rondale Moore plays, Wesley becomes just a touchdown-dependent
you were right.
option
That's a good
for
call.
Your fantasy line. And that makes me a little bit worried. Whereas like Wesley, I think he's actually gaining confidence from Kyler Murray, which is fantastic. We're seeing in the red zone. But if you have Rondale Moore out there and Christian Kirk out there, you're more or less saying one of those guys has to be the short or intermediate threats because the other is doing the deep ball stuff. We've seen Christian Kirk take over that role recently with Rondale Moore not playing. And I don't know where Wesley fits in because Zach Ertz is also commandeering that kind of middle of the field. So I was a little bit worried about going that direction. You mentioned Braxton Berrios in his return and also said he's the poor man's Danny Amendola.
Rich man's, I should have said.
Oh, well, I was going to say,
I
the
said
poor man's
man's.
Julian Edelman, right?
Yeah, that's
Tom
right.
Brady is like thirsting for Braxton Berrios. What would Tom Brady trade? That says you don't get the Buccaneers general manager that gets Tom Brady's like, I will give you X draft pick for Braxton Berrios. Jets, what do you want? Jets could say third round pick, and Tom's like, sure. I need to have this guy. He actually think would fit pretty well for that Buccaneers offense. They're blessed wide receiver wise, even with Antonio Brown leaving and
is he gone? Because they have not officially released him yet.
He's gone.
He's gone. Okay.
They're saving themselves because they tried to put an injured player out in the field and he didn't want to. So now they have to put their tail behind their legs and
all right.
Okay, Antonio, we'll keep you on the roster and pay you a little bit to just don't say anything else about what we kind of did that was negligent to the player. No, he's not playing a game. I don't think he's playing a game in the NFL ever again. I had said this is more blackball worthy than anything that ever happened to Colin Kaepernick, and I would be stunned if Antonio Brown ever steps onto the NFL field again. So yeah, but even still, like Scotty Miller, I think is really good. Darden, Jalen, I think it's Jalen Darden.
Jalen Darden, yeah.
I think Darden's a pretty good wide receiver too. Like we're talking about wide receivers 6 and 7 for the Buccaneers, and we're also forgetting Perriman, who was the winner for that Bills game a couple weeks ago too. They have a lot of depth at wide receiver, and I love Tyler Johnson. I've been a Tyler Johnson supporter as a Big Ten guy for a number of years. So I think they're more suited to get through these tough times with Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown than any other team in the NFL right now. And it makes me a little bit skeptical that Cyril Grayson's a thing. I actually really like Cedric Wilson. I think Cedric Wilson would be the one pickup at wide receiver besides KJ Osborne and Berrios, who I think are probably more highly rostered. I think Cedric Wilson is a wide receiver 3 for me minimum with Gallup done for the year. I think Wilson has been good when he's been forced to play, and they've had a lot of injuries, whether it be to Cooper or Gallup throughout the season, and Wilson has been productive. And this is still a very important match for the Cowboys this week with playoff seeding on the line, possibly I don't know if they want to avoid or they want to set up a scenario where the Packers are in round 2. I'm not quite sure what Mike McCarthy wants to have happen, but I like Cedric Wilson quite a bit as a wide receiver 3 at minimum this week.
I love that call. And Cedric Wilson probably has played himself into a contract for next year, especially with the late season injury to Michael Gallup. They probably weren't going to be able to retain him anyway. But at this point, next year, Cedric Wilson is looking like he could be that team starting wide receiver 3. I think that's a great call. And especially, I really like what you talked about with the depth of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers wide receivers. That's something that we're going to have to bring over to the dynasty discussion when we go in January, February, and March.
Yeah, I was really sad when the Michael Gallup injury happened because it looked serious as non-contact. And obviously, he's a free agent. He's going to be a free agent this year. One of my friends said, okay, he's guaranteed to go to Jacksonville now. Like he's guaranteed to sign a contract with the Jaguars. That's actually probably not a bad landing spot, but I'll be really curious. We talk about the quarterbacks and the roulettes that are going to happen with that and Russell Wilson and Aaron Rodgers and et cetera. Some of these like wide receiver 2s for a lot of teams, and Gallup I know wasn't, but he's that type of player and talent. Yeah. It'll be really interesting because I think we've seen not Tyler Boyd, but I was going to say Marvin Jones, right, for the Bengals, then went to, I think, the Lions afterwards.
Yeah.
That type of wide receiver can actually have a big jump in fantasy value if he hits the right situation, and Gallup is a perfect example. Cedric Wilson also is the perfect example of why I hate the jersey change. Cedric Wilson should not be number 1 jersey. Like we should have that reserved for actually relevant and good players. I don't need the special teams gunner or the 4th string wide receiver to have the number 1 jersey. And it bothers me to no end when I see that. So anyone listening out there, if you have that same like thought process, who's this number 1 guy? Oh, it's their 5th string wide receiver. Hey, he's gunning on the special teams. Just let me know on Twitter that I'm not the only one that's crazy on this because it really pisses me off every time I see it.
You are not alone. I'm sure, you know, that's what the beautiful, everyone thinks that social media is toxic and they're mostly right. But when you can find other people that share your disdain for marginal things, I think that's what's so good about social media.
Disdain for marginal things is how I describe social media in its best case scenario. You're probably right in that. Streaming defenses real quick. I guess like I had wrote down a couple names. Normally Jake is excellent in this and I put in the bare minimum, I guess. I think Washington against whatever the Giants trot out at quarterback has to be your top pickup. And I know people are going to get a little squeamish because Washington defense hasn't been very good. They're missing Chase Young and that stadium is falling apart. So therefore the team is too, yada, yada. I get all of that. But the Giants are like bad. Mike Glennon had negative passing yards. That should never happen in the year 2021, 22, 2020. Any 2020 somethings should never have a negative passing yards ever. I thought Mac Jones had the most embarrassing game at a quarterback in this decade. Mike Glennon decided, hey, I got that one up in like 3 weeks later. It's incredible. I will play the Washington defense if I have to, if I was in that championship week this week.
How about a bit, so a lot of teams, when we get into the fantasy playoffs in your sharper leagues, and you know what, I even think your casual home leagues are becoming more and more sharp with all the information flows with podcasts like you and Jake do. People have picked up 2 and 3 defenses heading into the playoffs. So it's slim pickings. So if you want a sleeper defense, tell me what you think. Now, this is crazy. You got to be a little crazy if you want to do this, but how about the Detroit defense, knowing they are going to possibly be facing Jordan Love for at least a half and maybe more? So you're talking about there's probably only a handful of defenses out there, and there is risk involved. But the Lions are playing full go, and they're going to be playing what we call the JV team of the Packers. So not a great play, but your options might only be not that great.
I would really, really need to see what other teams are available, because I know a few scenarios where that could be considered. I'm biased. I'm really trying not to be I pride myself quite a bit as a Packers fan of, if anything, being biased in hating certain aspects of my team. And I'm aware. I really think Jordan Love is going to do okay. And I don't know if it's because Matt Flynn has been good again. Like Matt Flynn did well against the Lions, and Jordan Love's going to have this miraculous thing in the last week of the season too, or because maybe we being the Packers fan do keep Rodgers. We need Jordan Love to do well this week to have some trade value for him next year. I just don't think there's a lot of talent left, given injuries and just the roster to start the season. The Lions defense can really be capable of being effective. And I know what we saw against the Chiefs. You just engage 8, Madden blitz him, and then Jordan Love can't do anything. But if it is you have time to game plan for this. And I really believe Jordan Love will be effective enough. And I think Equanimity St. Brown probably gets a little bit more playing time. And if they call up like Malik Taylor as well too, like those guys are good enough. I think Jordan Love can be effective. So I'm not playing the Lions defense. I would have to see the other plays too. I think Washington would be clearly available, I think, in most scenarios like that, and would be my play this week, or the Chiefs defense, which is probably less likely, but still in a spot where I consider them. Colts too. Like those are the obvious ones against the crappy teams right now. But I think Washington is the one that's probably available for most people.
I'm with you there. And the Lions pick was more of not the talent on the Lions side. It was more an indictment against Jordan Love. But if you have confidence in Jordan Love, I hope so, because I took him over Jalen Hurts in a few of my dynasty leagues when they're both rookie. And I just need that to pan out so I don't look like a complete idiot to my home league friends.
Yeah, I'm a huge card collector, and I just bought my first PSA 10 rookie card of Jordan Love for probably more than I wanted to. So I'm doubling down. I'm prepared for that to spike in a good way, and hopefully for his fantasy value too. But yeah, the Hurts one is tough. I mean, Mario was really low on Jalen Hurts, and I know I do. I think you do as well too. Defer to his knowledge in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So I think Jordan Love is going to be a good enough player, and I'm hoping we get to see that a little bit this week. So that does it for us in the RotoWire NFL podcast, again, sponsored by WynnBET. Thank you, Alan, so much for jumping on with me and filling in for Jake. And thank you for filling in last week for me while I was on my birthday trip to Vegas. Hopefully the cold or whatever this is right now will subside, and award show next week with Jake will be less nasally and less congested, but we'll have to see between Jake and I who's going to be battling for that role more.
Give us a little teaser though. What are the categories? Because that's one of my favorite shows that you guys do. So what are the categories that you're going to be going over? This fantasy MVP is one of them, right?
Yeah, fantasy MVP, and then because with the waiver wire show, we'll do the waiver wire whip pickup, and almost assuredly will be Cordell Patterson. I think has to be, even though he's kind of tailed off at the end of the season, he's going to be the guy that will at least be my vote. We do the first round mock draft as well too. We normally do 12 rounds. Last year we were a little bit off, but the year before that, I think we pegged it almost down to a T where we had only 1 or 2 guys off in that, which was a lot of fun. And I know Jake and I do a decent amount of strategy and prep for that, for a silly, meaningless kind of mock draft, which is great. And then we do a few of the other random awards, which I think will be top wide receiver pickup from weeks 10 on. And I think the COVID fill in 2 waiver wire award show be kind of interesting too. We try to stick a little bit on brand for our show,
right?
But hey, if there's any awards that you, the listeners, want us to go ahead and do as well, that'd be great. I think we could have certainly plenty of comments we've had throughout the season too. So who was our top fan of the Tuesday RotoWire podcast? Be glad to give that award out. I have a few names right in mind right away too. So it's a great show. It's a good way to recap the season and get a start. But Alan, you're going to be on the broadcast now for many months to come after we are officially done with everything next week. You are going to be doing the Dynasty Show. Can you give the listeners a little bit of a breakdown on that and what you're expecting to do?
Yeah, you and Jake and the rest of the guys have been grinding so hard for the whole football season. We need to give you a breath just to like recoup and get your energy back, but not for long, because what we're going to do is we're going to start doing our Dynasty podcast the week of January 17th. I'll be here with Jerry Donabedian for the first show on Monday, January 17th. So when you're home from work watching basketball on Martin Luther King Day, throw on the live stream. We're going to be talking Dynasty. We just put out our Superflex Dynasty rankings on RotoWire.com. You can get those now. They're live. You can get them for 10 days free. RotoWire.com/try. And we're going to be breaking down. Jerry's going to tell me where I got my rankings wrong. What do I need to adjust before we put the rookies in? And hopefully you and Jake will both make appearances on that show. We're going to be doing it every week in the RotoWire Fantasy Football podcast feed. Look for it on Mondays or Tuesdays. We're not sure just yet.
I love that. Love that. I mean, the Dynasty stuff has been an area that we've certainly understood as a company that we wanted to expand a little bit further. And I think this podcast is the first way and we can really dip our toes into it more. And I think it's one of the biggest growing things in fantasy sports in general, whether it be baseball, basketball, football, whatever. The Dynasty community in the sports is huge. And, I'm a huge fan of that as well. I think I'm in 7 Dynasty leagues right now. And whether it be auction leagues or salary leagues, you name it, I'm in it. I think those are my favorite formats. And I'm excited to listen to what you got with you and Jerry.
Yeah. They're the most passionate fans. They're the year-round fans. And they're the ones that live and die on these, like, they know Dynasty fans know who like the next high school guy is. And I learned from the fan, that's, and again,
the Devy leagues, the Devy leagues too. Like, that's another part of this where you're drafting the college guys. I love that. I love that. Love the format more. And you're right. The passionate fans certainly reside, or at least start, in Dynasty football.
Yeah.
And I think
they're obnoxious, though. They're obnoxious.
The judgmental. Yes, I was going to say the judgmental fans.
They're horrible people. I'll be first to admit, the audience that we have, they're horrible, pretentious people. I'll admit it. So if you want to become horrible and pretentious, become a hardcore Dynasty fan and listen to the podcast.
Yeah, sign me up. All right, that does it for us, guys. Again, thanks for listening. Best of luck if you are in your Week 18 championships. Once you win after listening to this podcast, next week, just quit it. Join a Week 17 one. But again, best of luck for those lineups. Again, next week, Jake and I will be back going over the award show for the fantasy season. And that does it for us.